My granddaughter's whisper cut through the quiet kitchen like glass breaking. "Grandma," Emma said, clutching her crayon. "I heard Mommy and Daddy say they're putting you in a home today and taking your money." For a moment, I kept stirring the potatoes, as if nothing had happened. I reached down and smoothed her hair, smiling the way grandmothers are supposed to. Inside, though, fire spread through my chest. Rage, clarity, resolve. At 67, I had buried my husband, sold my house, and handed over everything I thought was family. What Brian and Jessica didn't know was that I still had more power than they imagined, and thanks to Emma's innocent honesty, I now had reason to use it. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, phone already in my hand. "David, it's Margaret Sullivan, 2 o'clock, emergency." He didn't ask questions. My lawyer never had to. Next, I dialed the bank. "This is Margaret Sullivan, account ending in 789. I need immediate transfers." Numbers rolled back at me. Insurance, savings, CDs. I already knew them, more than Brian and Jessica ever suspected. Enough to crush their little plan before dinner was even served. When I returned, Emma was still coloring. A house, a sky, stick figures with hands joined. I crouched beside her. "Sweetheart, how would you like to help Grandma with a very special project?" Her blue eyes lit up. "What kind?" "The kind that teaches people not to count their chickens before they hatch." By 1:30, we were at the corner cafe. David rose when he saw me, concern in his eyes. "They think I'm helpless," I told him. "They're about to learn otherwise." He nodded. "Then we'll do everything. Power of attorney revoked, new will, transfers, all today. Before they come home," I added. And we did. Paper after paper slid across his desk until my hand cramped from signing. Accounts moved. A new will drafted. Emma protected. My freedom secured. At 3:30, Emma and I walked back into the house as if it were any ordinary day. I tied on my apron and pulled out the roast. If they wanted a compliant old woman, that's what they'd see. Dinner bubbling, kitchen warm, apron dusted with flour. But the mirror in the window showed something else. Eyes sharper than they'd been in months. A smile that wasn't sweet at all. Their car crunched into the driveway. Voices too cheerful drifted through the door. "Mom, we're home," Jessica sang. I set the table, every plate like a stage prop. We ate in brittle silence, Emma chattering while they pushed food around. By 7, Brian cleared his throat. "Mom, can we talk in the living room?" I followed, heart steady, steps even. They perched on the couch, fumbling. "We think it's time for assisted living, Shady Oaks." I leaned back in my chair by the window, folded my hands, and smiled. "Interesting timing," I said softly, pulling out my phone. "David, it's Margaret. Could you come over now?" "Yes, I think it's time." If you've ever felt underestimated, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. You're not alone. Sometimes the fight begins right when they think it's already over. The doorbell rang 10 minutes later. A briefcase snapped open, and I looked at my son and daughter-in-law with calm eyes. "Let's begin with the power of attorney." David laid his briefcase on the coffee table, snapping the brass locks open. The sound cut through the living room like a gunshot. Brian stiffened. Jessica's hand crept to his sleeve, her knuckles white. I settled deeper into my chair by the window, letting the silence press down on them before David spoke. "As of this afternoon," he began, his voice calm and professional, "the power of attorney that gave Brian and Jessica control over Margaret Sullivan's affairs has been formally revoked. They no longer have any legal authority over her finances or her decisions." Brian shot to his feet. "Planning to use? We weren't planning anything." "Sit down, son," I said evenly. My voice carried more weight than it had in years. He froze, then slowly lowered himself back onto the couch. Jessica's face had gone pale. her eyes darting from David's briefcase to my hands folded in my lap. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. I wanted them to feel it, to sit in it the way I had sat alone for 18 months under their roof, reduced to a live-in babysitter, an invisible wallet, a woman whose life had been repurposed for their convenience. I remembered the first night after Frank's funeral when they swooped in, voices dripping with concern. "Mom, you can't live alone. You need us." I had believed them. I had sold my home, the house Frank and I shared for 32 years, because my son told me it was the right thing to do. $600,000 gone in a blink. Jessica's eyes had glittered when she heard the sale price. I thought it was kindness. It was hunger. "Margaret," Jessica stammered now, her voice trembling. "Why would you do this?" I turned my gaze on her. "Because Emma has better hearing than you think. She told me what you planned this morning, about putting me in a home and taking my money." The words landed like a slap. Jessica's mouth opened, closed, then opened again with nothing to say. David shuffled papers. "Mrs. Sullivan has also transferred all of her assets, checking, savings, CDs, to new accounts at a bank across town. The total, roughly $637,000, is now beyond your reach." Jessica gasped. Brian rubbed his hands through his hair. "That money! You gave us that money," he muttered. "Correction," David said smoothly. "There was never a formal loan agreement. The transfer was understood to be contingent on Margaret's permanent residence in this household. Since that arrangement is ending, repayment is expected, with interest." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "Every penny," I said, "plus 18 months of rent, babysitting, and the cost of every meal I paid for." Their shock was almost comical, but beneath it was my pain, years of it. I had cooked for them, scrubbed dishes until my hands cracked, folded their laundry in silence while they went out 3 nights a week. Jessica had called it my contribution. Brian said it kept me young, but the truth was, they had taken my independence and whittled it down until I felt like furniture. And now they were shocked because the furniture had found its voice. Jessica's words came out in a whisper. "We can work this out." I laughed, the sound sharp enough to sting. "Work it out? You cut me off from my friends. You told the church ladies I wasn't up for visitors. You smiled in my face while planning to lock me away. That isn't love. That's theft dressed up as family duty." I looked at Brian, really looked at him. The same boy who once brought me dandelions from the yard, now a man who thought I was disposable. His shoulders hunched, his eyes refusing to meet mine. He knew exactly what he had done. "David," I said softly, "tell them about the will." David slid another folder from his case. "The previous will left the entire estate to Brian with provisions for Emma's education. The new version makes significant changes. Margaret has decided that Emma will inherit everything, held in trust until she turns 25. Brian and Jessica receive nothing." Jessica let out a broken sound, half sob, half outrage. "You can't do this. We have bills, a mortgage, Emma's future to think about." I cut her off. "You should have thought about Emma before you plotted to rob her grandmother blind. She's the only reason I'm not homeless today. That little girl saved me with her honesty. She'll have everything. You'll have nothing." The room went silent again. The ticking clock on the mantel grew louder, marking every second of their shock. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt since Frank was alive. Power. Not spite, not bitterness, but strength born from finally naming the truth. I rose slowly, smoothing the skirt of my dress. My hand brushed the picture frame on the mantel. Frank's smile frozen in time. He had worked 2 jobs for decades so we could save. He would have been sick to see our son scheming to strip me of everything. "You wanted me gone," I said, turning back to them. "But you never once considered what I might do if I fought back. You thought grief made me weak. You forgot that grief also makes you dangerous." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Brian buried his face in his hands. I didn't flinch. For 18 months, I had been their servant, their silent provider. Now, I was their reckoning. The front door closed behind David when he left that night, leaving me alone in the living room. Emma was asleep upstairs, safe in her innocence. Brian and Jessica whispered furiously in the kitchen, their voices sharp with panic. I sat in my chair, watching the shadows stretch across the carpet, and felt the weight of everything they had taken: my house, my money, my dignity. But something else settled into me too, a strange calm. For the first time since Frank's death, I knew I wasn't powerless. I thought about the women from church who had stopped calling, assuming I was too tired to socialize. I thought about the friends I used to meet for book club, the laughter I'd traded away for bedtime stories and unpaid babysitting. They had isolated me so carefully, like wrapping me in plastic. But that plastic was tearing now, and I could breathe. Upstairs, Emma stirred and called my name in her sleep. My heart broke a little. She was too young to understand betrayal, too tender to know the cost of trust. But she would learn someday that her grandmother refused to be erased. I poured myself a glass of water in the kitchen. Brian and Jessica stopped talking when I entered. Their eyes tracked me, wary, as if I were a stranger in my own home. I set the glass down slowly, deliberately. "Tomorrow," I said, "things will look very different." And I meant it. The paperwork was only the beginning. When I climbed into bed that night, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I remembered every manipulation, every guilt trip, every time Brian said, "At your age, wouldn't you rather be with family?" As though 67 were the same as 97, as though I were incapable of cooking, driving, thinking for myself. I thought about Jessica's syrupy compliments. "Emma's doing so well in school, thanks to you." Translation: keep tutoring her so we can keep going out. Every little slight gathered in my chest, pressing down like stones. But beneath those stones was steel. The house creaked in the dark. I heard their footsteps, their whispered arguments, the refrigerator door opening and slamming shut. They were nervous. They should be. Tomorrow, they would wake up in a house they thought was theirs, only to discover the ground shifting under their feet. I closed my eyes and let myself imagine a different tomorrow. An apartment with sunlight, a book club meeting, my own key turning in my own lock. I had given up so much, but now I was taking it back piece by piece. And yet, even as sleep tugged at me, I knew there was more they hadn't revealed. The way Brian had avoided my eyes that morning, the way Jessica had hugged me too tightly as though it were goodbye, it gnawed at me. What else were they hiding? The question hung in the air like smoke. And when dawn broke, I realized the reckoning had only begun. What else were they hiding? The thought coiled in my chest like a snake. I had stripped Brian and Jessica of their authority, secured my money, rewritten my will. But I knew my son. His mind never stopped scheming. The way he avoided my eyes that morning, the way Jessica clutched me as though saying goodbye, it meant something. And I wasn't finished until I knew what. The next morning, the house smelled of coffee and leftover pot roast. Emma padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, while Brian and Jessica moved stiffly around each other, pretending at normalcy. Brian muttered a greeting without looking at me. Jessica's smile was brittle, her lipstick smudged from sleeplessness. I poured myself coffee and sat at the table, calm on the outside, my mind already steps ahead. After breakfast, when they left for errands again, I gathered my papers, bank statements, insurance policies, Frank's old files, and stacked them neatly into a leather folder. I carried it everywhere now, the weight reassuring against my hip. Widow's intuition, yes, but also strategy. I wouldn't give them another inch of ignorance to exploit. By noon, I was sitting in David Morrison's office again. Emma played in the waiting room with crayons while I laid out the documents. "Something's still wrong," I said, my voice low. "They're hiding more. I can feel it." David adjusted his glasses, flipping through the stack. "We've secured your accounts and revoked the power of attorney. That buys you space. But if you want the full picture, we need to dig deeper. Insurance records, the sale of your house, anything Brian handled after Frank's death. Grief makes you blind." I had let Brian sign paperwork, close accounts, even call the insurance company in those first weeks when my hands shook too hard to hold a pen. I'd believed it was love. Now I saw it for what it was: control. "Start with Frank's insurance," I told David. "Every policy, every beneficiary. I want it all." David nodded. "I'll make some calls. But Margaret, this may turn up things you don't want to know." I met his eyes. The truth can't hurt me more than lies already have. That afternoon, I went to the bank alone. Emma was at a play date, her laughter echoing from the yard as Jessica drove her off without meeting my gaze. Inside the branch, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. Janet, the manager, looked surprised to see me back so soon. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said gently, "are you sure you're up for all this stress?" I smiled thinly. "Stress is what happens when you ignore problems. I'm done ignoring." We reviewed every account, every transfer. My handwriting on the checks leapt up from the paper like accusations against my own naivete. $600,000 funneled directly into Brian's mortgage, Jessica's credit cards, their car payments. Not a loan, not a gift. Blood money dressed as filial devotion. I pressed my palm against the counter, steadying myself. "Do you want us to open a fraud inquiry?" Janet asked carefully. "Not yet," I said, "but keep copies, every document. I may need them." That night, alone in my room, I pulled out Frank's old shoebox of papers. Insurance bills, pay stubs, tax returns. I traced his handwriting on the margins, remembering the nights he'd sat at the kitchen table balancing figures while I washed dishes. He had been steady, hardworking, frugal, and yet there were gaps. Numbers that didn't add up. A policy I didn't recognize, dated 5 years before his death. The beneficiary line blurred with age, but I could still make out his secretary's name, Linda Morrison. I froze, the paper trembling in my hands. My breath came shallow. Frank, my Frank, who had worked 2 jobs to give us stability, had left a policy to another woman? David's words echoed. "This may turn up things you don't want to know." I set the paper down, my hands suddenly cold. Grief stabbed me anew, sharper this time because it came laced with betrayal. Was this what Brian had known all along? The days that followed blurred into a routine of quiet preparation. I made Emma's breakfast, packed her lunch, tied her shoelaces, all while cataloging evidence in my head. Every receipt, every email, every memory of Brian pushing me toward dependency became part of a ledger I was building. I would balance it, even if it killed me. At night, when the house settled into uneasy silence, I wrote lists, lawyers to call, questions to ask, old friends to reach out to, people Brian and Jessica had carefully kept away from me. I dialed numbers I hadn't touched in months. "Margaret?" one of the church ladies said, her voice warm with surprise. "We thought you were ill. Brian said—" "I'm fine," I interrupted gently. "Better than fine, and I'll be back at Bible study this Sunday." There was a pause, then laughter, joyous and incredulous. "Well, praise the Lord, we've missed you." The next Sunday, I walked into the church hall with my head high. Conversations hushed, eyes turned. Some faces were sympathetic, others wary. Brian and Jessica hadn't just isolated me, they'd spread their version of the story. But when I lifted my chin and smiled, people came. Old friends clasped my hands, hugged me tight, whispered words of encouragement. It was like sunlight after a long winter. Still, in quiet moments, doubt gnawed. If Frank had betrayed me with Linda, what else had I missed? If Brian had stolen more than I knew, how deep did the rot go? I carried the shoebox of papers back to David's office. He scanned them, his brow furrowing. "Margaret," he said finally, "this policy, it's large. $2 million. Half of it went to Linda Morrison. The other half should have gone to you." I swallowed hard. Should have? His eyes met mine, steady but grim. "I want to confirm before I say more. But if you only received $500,000, the world tilted. My hands gripped the arms of the chair, $500,000 missing. Brian's shadow everywhere. David touched the papers. "Let me dig. I'll need a few days." I nodded numbly. I left his office and sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel while the city moved around me. People walked dogs, bought coffee, lived lives untouched by betrayal. Mine, meanwhile, felt like a house with the floor ripped out. When I got home, Jessica was in the kitchen, scrolling her phone with tight lips. Brian wasn't back yet. She glanced up, eyes sharp. "You were gone a long time." "Errands," I said. Her gaze lingered, suspicious. I met it without blinking. That night, as I lay in bed, Emma asleep down the hall, I realized the fight had shifted. No longer just about money or independence. Now, it was about truth, about unearthing every buried secret they'd hoped to keep hidden. I rolled over, staring at the shadows across the ceiling. Somewhere out there, Linda Morrison lived with a husband and teenage daughters, carrying half of Frank's legacy. And Brian, my own son, had stolen what was mine. The question burned hotter now, no longer a whisper but a demand. What else have they hidden from me? The answer would come. I would drag it into the light, piece by piece. And as dawn broke the next morning, my phone buzzed with a call from David. His voice was steady, but the words chilled me. "Margaret," he said, "I've found something, and you're not going to like it." "Margaret," David repeated, his voice lower now, careful. "I've found something, and you're not going to like it." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles whitened. "Say it." "There was a second insurance policy," he said. $2 million. Purchased 5 years before Frank died. Half went to a woman named Linda Morrison. The name struck like a hammer. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the chair legs screeching against tile. Linda. I remembered her. Blonde, always too polished, too friendly at company picnics. Frank's secretary. "And the other half?" My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else. David hesitated. "It should have gone to you, 1 million, but records show you only received 500,000. The other half?" He sighed. Brian intercepted it. The world seemed to tilt. The hum of the refrigerator roared in my ears. "He stole it?" "Yes," David said gently. "Right after the funeral. He told the insurance company he was managing your finances. He signed papers, sloppy forgeries, but they passed. The company issued one check to you, one to Linda. Your son told you the policy was only worth $500,000. You believed him." My hand trembled. I pressed it flat against the cool table surface, trying to steady myself. "So Frank betrayed me with Linda, and Brian stole from me on top of it." David didn't answer. He didn't need to. After the call, I sat in silence, staring at the floral tablecloth Jessica had picked out. "Something cheerful," she'd said. It blurred before my eyes. Betrayal layered upon betrayal. My husband, my son. The two men I had built my life around had carved it out from under me. That night, I couldn't eat. Emma pushed her peas around her plate, chattering about school projects, while Jessica smiled too brightly and Brian avoided looking at me. My fork stayed still. I heard their voices as though from underwater, the words muffled, meaningless. Later, in my room, I opened Frank's shoebox again. My fingers traced his handwriting, once so familiar, now heavy with lies, receipts, premium payments, his neat check marks. How many nights had he sat here, pretending he was saving for our future, while he wrote her name into the margins of my life? Tears burned my eyes. For the first time since Frank's death, I let myself cry. Not the silent tears I'd shed at his funeral, but the guttural sobs of someone realizing the past was rotten all along. My pillow was damp before I finally slept, exhausted and hollow. The next morning, I woke to the sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen. Brian and Jessica, their voices too loud, too forced. The smell of coffee and toast filled the house. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening, my face stiff from dried tears. How could they laugh while everything was unraveling? How could they smile at me after what they'd done? I walked into the kitchen. The laughter stopped. Brian glanced at me, then back at his mug. Jessica fiddled with the butter knife, her hands trembling. "Good morning, Mom," Brian said. His tone was smooth, practiced. "We were just talking about maybe taking a trip next summer. Europe, maybe." The audacity almost made me laugh. They were already spending money that wasn't theirs, planning vacations while waiting for me to crumble. I sat at the table. "Europe sounds nice," I said quietly. Jessica's eyes darted to Brian. He forced a smile. "You'd love it, Mom. We could all go." I didn't answer. My silence was louder than any argument. That afternoon, David called again. "Maggie," he said, using the name only old friends did. "Burke, Brian's lawyer, filed a motion. They want you declared incompetent. They're pushing for a psychological evaluation." The words chilled me. They're still trying that? Yes. They know they're losing control. This is their Hail Mary. I closed my eyes. Even after everything, they wanted to erase me, erase my voice, to sign me away with a doctor's pen. The evaluation was set for Friday morning. I prepared like a soldier dressing for battle. Navy suit, pearl earrings, hair carefully pinned. In the mirror, I looked like a woman in control, but inside my stomach churned. Dr. Coleman's office smelled of coffee and disinfectant. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, glasses perched on her nose, her voice kind. "Mrs. Sullivan, I know this evaluation was requested by your son's attorney, but I'm independent. I'm here to assess you fairly." I nodded. For 2 hours, she tested me. Memory exercises, logic puzzles, financial reasoning. I answered each with precision, explaining why I moved money, why I rewrote my will. Still, a voice whispered inside, "What if she doesn't believe you? What if she sees an old woman grasping at straws?" When it was over, she smiled. "You seem to have very clear recall and strong analytical skills. Do you feel your actions might seem extreme to others?" I looked her in the eye. "If someone tried to steal your life savings and have you committed against your will, what would you consider appropriate?" She paused, then scribbled a note. "Point taken." Walking out of her office, I felt lighter, but the relief didn't last, because David was waiting with news worse than before. "Burke's team is digging into Frank's policies," he said grimly. "They've raised questions about irregularities, specifically whether you knew all the beneficiaries." My heart pounded. "What do you mean? There might have been more. Brian may have known details you didn't." It felt like the floor gave way. More? How much more could there be? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my apartment, the city lights painting the walls in cold blue. My hands shook as I poured tea I never drank. Every sound in the night pressed down on me, the hum of traffic, the distant bark of a dog. Betrayal had followed me here, seeping into every corner. When the phone finally rang the next morning, I nearly dropped it. David's voice was quiet. I confirmed it. Frank's policy named Linda Morrison not just as a beneficiary. She was listed because she was pregnant with his child. The world froze. Pregnant. My husband's mistress, carrying a child I never knew existed. My son had known. He had hidden it. He had stolen from me to cover his father's affair. I couldn't breathe. I pressed a hand to my chest, gasping. The betrayal was complete, like a knife twisting in old wounds. My husband's lies, my son's theft, my life rewritten without my consent. For a long time, I sat there in silence, staring at nothing. The walls closed in, the air thick. My hands trembled. For the first time, I wondered if I could really keep fighting. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too old. Maybe this was too much. My phone buzzed again. A text from Brian. Mom, please stop. You don't understand what you're doing. Let's talk tonight. I stared at the screen. The boy I had raised, the man who had stolen from me, was still trying to control the story. And for the first time, a terrible thought crept in. What if I couldn't win? I set the phone down. My chest ached, my throat raw. I was losing pieces of myself to this war, piece by piece. And then, faintly, from the hall, Emma's voice floated in memory. Grandma, I missed you so much. Why did you leave? I closed my eyes, tears sliding down my cheeks. For her, I had to keep going. But right then, alone in the dark, it felt like the weight might crush me. The phone rang again. David's voice was urgent this time. Margaret, we need to meet. I've uncovered more, and it changes everything. Margaret, we need to meet. I've uncovered more, and it changes everything. David's voice carried urgency that rattled me awake. Within the hour, I was sitting in his office, the morning sun slanting through blinds, striping the desk between us. He slid a folder across. Inside were copies of documents I didn't recognize, insurance disbursement forms, bank transfers, email chains. At the top, one forged signature leapt out. Mine. This, David said, tapping the page, was submitted by Brian the week after Frank's funeral. He told the insurance company you'd delegated all authority to him. He intercepted $500,000. My stomach turned, but he wasn't finished. He also coordinated directly with Linda Morrison, convinced her that she deserved the full $1 million after her miscarriage. He manipulated her into silence and pocketed your share. The room tilted. So he knew about Frank's affair, the pregnancy, all of it? David nodded grimly. He's been hiding it for years. And Margaret? He committed insurance fraud, forgery, elder abuse. We have grounds for criminal charges. I closed the folder slowly. Then let's stop playing defense. File everything. Today. David studied me. Are you sure? This isn't just civil anymore. He could go to prison. I met his eyes, steady. So be it. He chose this path when he decided his mother was expendable. By noon, the complaints were drafted. Insurance fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of the elderly. The weight of the charges filled the air like thunderclouds. That evening, I drove past their house. The curtains glowed warmly, silhouettes moving inside. My sons, my daughter-in-laws, my granddaughters. For a moment, my heart faltered. Emma. She was the only innocent in this war. But wars weren't won by retreat. The next day, David called. The police will serve notice soon. Be ready. I didn't have to wait long. It was Thursday night when the knock came. Sharp. Official. 2 officers at the door. Brian opened it, confusion clouding his face as papers were thrust into his hands. Jessica's scream carried up the stairs. I stood at the edge of the living room, my purse slung over my shoulder, calm as stone. What's this? Brian barked. Notice of investigation, one officer said. Insurance fraud, elder abuse, forgery. You'll be contacted for questioning. Brian's face drained of color. Jessica clutched his arm, eyes wide with terror. I stepped forward. Surprised? My voice was quiet, but it cut. You thought you could bury me under lies, but you forgot who taught you to tell the truth in the first place. His mouth opened, closed, but no words came. The officers left. Silence filled the house. Finally, Jessica found her voice. Margaret, please. You don't know what you've done. This will ruin us. I turned toward her, my eyes colder than she'd ever seen. You ruined yourselves the day you decided I was nothing but a checkbook and a babysitter. The following week, everything accelerated. Investigators questioned Brian at his office. Neighbors whispered. Jessica avoided eye contact at church. Emma asked innocent questions. Why is Daddy so sad? That twisted my heart. But I kept going. One afternoon, Jessica cornered me in the kitchen, her face blotchy from tears. You can't let them send him to prison. He's your son. I set down the dish towel slowly. He's also a thief, a liar, and he would have had me declared incompetent if Emma hadn't told me the truth. Is that the son you want me to protect? Her lips trembled. She had no answer. Meanwhile, David built the case like a fortress. He gathered bank statements, emails where Brian promised I'd always have a home, receipts showing I paid for groceries, utilities, even repairs. The picture was clear. 18 months of systematic exploitation. The day of the confrontation came sooner than I expected. David arranged a meeting, neutral ground, his office. Brian and Jessica sat across from me, their lawyer Burke at their side. The air was thick with tension. Burke started smoothly. Mrs. Sullivan, surely we can resolve this privately. Litigation will destroy your family. You don't want that. I leaned forward. What I don't want is to be erased. What I don't want is my granddaughter learning that betrayal has no cost. So no, Mr. Burke, this won't be swept under the rug. Brian's face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot. Mom, please, I was protecting you. If you'd known about Dad's affair, about Linda. I slammed my hand on the table, startling even myself. Protecting me? By stealing from me? By forging my name? By planning to lock me in a nursing home while you spent my money on vacations? Jessica flinched. Burke raised a hand. Let's not. No, I snapped. Let's tell the truth. You thought grief made me weak, but grief taught me how to fight. For a moment, silence. Then David slid a document across the table. Criminal charges are already filed. Unless a settlement is reached, this goes to court. And given the evidence, prison time is likely. Jessica burst into tears. Brian buried his face in his hands. I watched them both, my heart pounding but steady. This was the moment I reclaimed not just my money, but my dignity. After the meeting, outside in the crisp air, David touched my shoulder. You handled yourself perfectly. I exhaled. For the first time in years, I feel alive. But the battle wasn't finished. A week later, news broke. Local insurance agent under investigation for fraud and elder abuse. Brian's name splashed across headlines. Calls flooded my phone. Neighbors, old friends, reporters. I ignored them all, focusing only on Emma. She came to me one evening, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Grandma, is Daddy in trouble? I knelt, pulling her close. He made mistakes, sweetheart, and now he has to face them. Her eyes filled with tears. Are you mad at him? I kissed her forehead. I'm sad, but I will always love him. And I'll always love you. Inside, though, my resolve hardened. Love didn't erase consequences. The investigation sped forward. Evidence mounted. David called daily with updates. Burke fought tooth and nail, claiming the money had been a gift, that I was unstable. But Dr. Coleman's evaluation shut that down. I was competent. I was credible. Finally, the hammer fell. A warrant. Brian arrested. Cameras flashed as he was led away in handcuffs. Jessica wailed, shielding her face. Emma clung to her teacher at school, confused and frightened. And I stood at my apartment window, watching the news ticker scroll across the screen. My son, the man who thought me powerless, was now the face of scandal. The phone rang. Jessica's voice was ragged. "Margaret, please, can't you drop the charges? Emma needs her father." I closed my eyes. Emma needs parents who don't lie and steal. He made his choices. She sobbed, then the line went dead. That night, alone in bed, I stared at the ceiling. Victory felt hollow. I had fought back, yes, but at what cost? My family shattered, my trust demolished. The weight pressed heavy. And yet, beneath it all, a quiet certainty grew. This was necessary. Painful, but necessary. The next morning, David arrived with more papers. "Restitution," he said simply. "If the judge approves, you'll recover $700,000 plus fees. Jessica may have to sell the house." I signed slowly. My hand didn't tremble. As David packed up, he looked at me. "Tomorrow's the hearing. Are you ready?" I thought of Frank's betrayal, Brian's theft, Jessica's complicity. I thought of Emma's innocent eyes, the way she had saved me with a whisper. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm ready." "Tomorrow's the hearing. Are you ready?" David's question lingered as I sat across from him, the stack of papers heavy between us. I took a deep breath. "I've been ready for months," I said quietly. I just didn't know it until now. That night, I hardly slept. Memories chased each other through the dark. Frank's smile, Brian's laughter as a child, Emma's whisper that saved me. At dawn, I rose, dressed carefully, and looked at myself in the mirror. Navy suit again, pearls at my ears, hair brushed smooth. Not armor exactly, but a statement. I am here. I am capable. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and paper. People shuffled through hallways, voices hushed. Jessica sat on one bench, her face pale, clutching Emma's hand. My granddaughter's eyes lit up when she saw me. She tugged free and ran to me, hugging my waist. "Grandma?" she whispered. "Don't be scared." I kissed the top of her head. "I'm not scared, sweetheart. I'm just ready." Inside the courtroom, Brian stood at the defense table, shackles around his wrists, head bowed. For a moment, my heart clenched. No mother imagines her child here. But then I remembered his forged signature on those documents, his voice planning my confinement, his hand in my stolen money. Love didn't erase responsibility. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Lawyers spoke in crisp voices. Evidence was read aloud. Bank transfers, emails, testimonies. My name, repeated again and again, not as a victim, but as a witness to my own survival. At one point, Burke argued that I had misunderstood the arrangement, that my son was merely helping me. I raised my hand. The judge allowed me to speak. "I am 67 years old," I said, my voice clear. "I drive, I cook, I read. I can tell you every step my husband took before he died. What I cannot do is tolerate being stolen from by the people I trusted most. That is not help. That is abuse." The room was silent except for the scratch of the clerk's pen. Hours passed. At last, the judge delivered his decision. Brian would serve 18 months in minimum security, followed by probation. He was ordered to repay everything, $700,000 plus interest and fees. Jessica's house would be sold. Their life of comfort cracked open under the weight of truth. I walked out into the sunlight, blinking. The sky was impossibly blue. Emma clutched my hand, looking up at me. "Is Daddy going to be okay?" she asked softly. I bent down to her level. "He's going to learn, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to learn the hard way. But I believe he will be okay." She nodded slowly, as if weighing my words. Then she smiled faintly. "Can I still come stay with you?" My throat tightened. "Every weekend, if you want." And she did. The months that followed were quieter. Jessica moved into a small apartment and took a job at a dental office. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes when she came to drop Emma off, but also something else, a kind of humility, maybe even growth. Emma thrived. She learned to swim in the pool at my apartment complex, baked cookies at my side, laughed again. As for me, I rediscovered pieces of myself I thought were gone. I joined a book club, enrolled in art classes at the community college, started volunteering at the animal shelter. My days filled with color and voices, not the suffocating silence of Brian and Jessica's house. Sometimes, late at night, Frank's betrayal still stung. The knowledge of Linda Morrison, the child that never was. But pain no longer defined me. I let it pass through me, like wind through an open window, and chose to keep walking forward. 18 months later, Brian called from prison. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I don't deserve it, but could we start over?" I stood by the window, looking out at Riverside Park. Children ran laughing, couples walked hand in hand, joggers passed with steady strides. Life moved, always forward. "Yes," I said finally, "but on my terms this time. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean excusing. It means refusing to let bitterness poison what's left of your life." Now, at 67, I live freely for the first time in decades. I am not just someone's widow, someone's mother, someone's babysitter. I am myself, Margaret Sullivan, and I survived betrayal not by hiding, but by fighting back. And if you've ever felt underestimated, pushed aside, or treated like your life doesn't matter, I want you to remember this. You are never too old, too weak, or too late to take your power back. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that strength can rise even in the unlikeliest moments, sometimes with just a whisper from a child at a kitchen table. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to know. Where are you listening from tonight? Tell me the city you call home in the comments. Because our stories stretch farther than we realize, and your voice matters just as much as mine.